Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some of my absolute favorite books that I almost DNF'd. This is honestly why I'm usually really scared to DNF a book, because in my mind I'm always thinking, but what if it ends up being like this other time that I didn't DNF and it ended up being a new all-time favorite? So I'm always really nervous to DNF. It has nothing to do with being a completionist. I just am afraid that I'm gonna miss out. And these are books that I almost had that happen with. And I'm going to start with one that I feel like it's interesting because it's my favorite trilogy of all time, and that would be Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Technically, I did DNF Mistborn the first time around. I didn't read that much of it, though. I read the prologue and maybe the first couple of chapters. I don't know what was going through my head when I read that part, because I was like, ugh, I don't care. I don't know what it was. I didn't care at all about what was happening, which is strange because when I went back and started it again, I was really gripped by that prologue, so I have no idea what was going on with my stupid brain the first time around. But I'm so glad that I picked it back up and kept going. What's funny is after reading the first book, I was not all that in love with the Mistborn. Well, I hadn't read the whole trilogy, but I wasn't that in love with the story. I enjoyed it. But then it wasn't until about halfway through the second one that I really started to fall in love with it. And then after that, I was hooked and I was sold. And then I reread it and I liked it even more the second time around. So I love this trilogy. It is my absolute favorite. I don't know that there will ever be anything that beats it. There will be things that go up with it, absolutely, but I love it so much. And it's just so funny to me that for whatever reason, the first time I picked it up, didn't like it. The next one is one that I definitely think a lot of people also really love, but I haven't seen it talked about in a while, and that would be the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. This is one where the first 100 pages to me of the first book are honestly pretty slow. And I would like to go back and reread the Shades of Magic trilogy, probably when V.E. Schwab starts releasing her continuation series, which I'm really excited about. But I found the beginning really slow. I think overall this series is great if you're just getting into adult fantasy. I also think that it, for the most part, is a very easily accessible fantasy trilogy. But something about those first 100 pages are a little bit of a snooze fest. Maybe it's because the story, all of V.E. Schwab's stories, has such a cool premise. So when I picked it up, I was like, okay, this person, there's parallel Londons, and this person can go between them. This is going to be awesome. And that first chunk, nothing that substantial is really happening. And I was pretty let down by that. And then I kept going. And then once it gets to a certain point, if you've read the story, you know, once it gets to a certain point, then it's race to the finish line and it doesn't really stop. And then I was really invested, and I ended up reading the first and the second book really fast because it was right when the third book was coming out, and I picked up the third one and read it really fast as well. And then I've been a fan of V.E. Schwab's ever since. But that first book, it took me a little bit. Next up, we have Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This one, I even was messaging my friends like, ugh, I don't know. And my friend Alan from the channel Library of Alexandria loves this book. And so I was messaging Jesse, who's a mutual friend. I was like, I don't know. This book is weird and the main character is stupid, and I was not really having it. And then I was telling my husband, and I'm like, ugh, Thomas Senlin's so dumb. And I was telling him about how stupid I found this main character, and then my husband's like, oh man, I feel kind of bad for him though. And I'm like, yeah, but... And then the more I thought about it, the more I also was like, that'd probably be me in this scenario. I would probably be dumb in this scenario as well, and I'd probably be kind of in denial that things are going wrong. And then the more you read, the more you're like, oh no, I am Thomas Senlin. I am that stupid, naive tourist. You start to realize that it's you. We so often in books want to believe that we are the hero. We don't want to believe that we are Thomas Senlin, who's a character who sees horrific things happen and is like, and then moves on as if that's just not the norm. That doesn't happen. Surely the next person I come across won't commit something horrific, or the next place I go to won't be really bizarre. And then he gets there and he's like, I don't know what's going on, but this is not normal. I will find somebody who is a proper gentleman or a proper lady who will guide me. And then he just keeps stumbling his way through the Tower of Babel looking for his missing wife. And for a while, I was like, this guy, I can't stand him. And then, like I said, you realize you are him. And then you just really want him to find his wife, and then you feel really bad for him. And the book is charming, but weird. I always end up overusing the word weird when describing this book, but I'm really glad that I did not DNF it, but I almost did when I first started. Since I just mentioned my friend Jessie, I'll also say that I almost wanted to DNF Sword of Kygen. The reason I was never going to was because I did that book as a buddy read for Jessie's Shelf Space Book Club, and so I was never going to be able to DNF it, but I wanted to because the beginning of that book is not my favorite. Even though there are parts of that book that I think are magnificent and masterful, I overall still feel like that beginning, it's not one of those, oh, it had to take its time, or oh, well, that stuff, you had to get through it because it pays off later. The beginning is very on the nose. The exposition is extremely straightforward, which it did its job, but I found myself not loving how straightforward. I mean, you literally get a history lesson, not once, but multiple times in the first chunk of the book, in a classroom setting where somebody is telling you the history of their nation, and then later you get somebody telling you a story about their history, and I'm like, okay, it's a little direct. And I like direct world building, but that was so direct for me that I wasn't loving it. But I am so glad I pushed through, because that book, it's not really that beginning that makes that book. It's the middle. The middle of that book, almost everyone who reads it is blown away by the middle portion, the emphasis that the author puts on the aftermath of violence is phenomenal, exceptional, next to none. It's so good, but the beginning, I didn't like it. Next up, we have First Law by Joe Abercrombie. This, I think most people know what this is. It's grimdark fantasy. We follow a handful of characters who are all varying shades of terrible, and they're still kind of lovable, weirdly enough, but when you're first introduced to them, you kind of don't see it yet, especially the character Giselle. Giselle is insufferable, he's gross, he's stupid, and then Glokta is funny, but also he's a torturer. And then Logan, you're like, I don't get why this guy seems pretty nice to me. I kind of like this guy. And then you see other things where you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know. And there's not really a whole lot of plot. Most people who read First Law, that first book, pretty much the entire first book, you're like, I don't really know where this is going. It feels a little aimless. It just feels like it's going nowhere. It feels meandering. It feels pointless. And then at some point, there was a moment where I was like, oh dang, that was really emotional. And then I loved it after that. And there were several scenes that were so amazing. And then the book as a whole became so much more interesting to me. I started to like the characters, even though I hated them. I liked them at the same time. And then I loved the second book. Oh man, that second book is one of my favorite books. But I wanted to DNF it for quite a while. Last on the list is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I had heard so many people singing this book's praises, talking about how it's one of the most beautifully written books they'd ever read, how the themes are so powerful, how the main character is such a cinnamon roll. And I started that book and I was like, where? When? When is it gonna get good? I really was not into it at all. And I just remember listening to the audiobook like, ugh, when? I was listening to the audiobook while I was doing something mindless, like folding laundry or something, and I'm like, ugh, when is it gonna get good? I'm so close to DNFing this. And then there was just a few moments where I was like, I actually really liked that. And then I had another moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I had another moment where I'm like, oh, Laszlo's so nice. And then that kept happening until I was head over heels in love with this book. And then you get to the ending and you're like, that's the end? What? And then you have to wait for the next one. And then I got the next one. And that happened again. At the beginning of the second one, I was like, who are these people that we're following? What is this? I don't know what's going on. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust Laini Taylor because I should have trusted her in Strange the Dreamer, and so I'm going to trust her with Muse of Nightmares, and then I did, and now it's one of my favorite duologies of all time, and I agree with everybody that Lasso is a cinnamon roll, that the themes are beautiful, and that it's beautifully written. Let me know what some of your favorite books are that you almost put down or that you did put down and then had to restart. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye. My dog wants to come say hello. Hi, Luna. My wolf cub. Okay. I have to work now. You wanna go outside? Come here.